Hi everyone. Welcome to today's webinar where we'll show you an overview of how our purchasing workflow works, along with our connected services PW Web and Pacifictech Go app, and how they interface, providing web requisitions and approvals. My name is Bill Fligg, and I'm our North America Sales Manager. With us today, we also have Jamie Steele, and he's our Business Development Manager. Once I'm done with this short introduction, I will hand it over to Jamie so he can get into the overview and demo. After that, we'll be taking some questions, so feel free to put them into the chat as you think of them. Pacifictech is a global software development partner with over 20 years experience and commitment to Sage 300. With a suite of Sage 300 add-on modules, web-based connected services, mobile applications, and global private cloud hosting solutions, Pacifictech extends Sage 300 with Tier 1 capability. Pacifictech's AP procure-to-pay solutions take Sage 300 to a new level of functionality and capability. We've categorized our solutions into three groups. We have our workflow suite, which streamlines the process from procurement to payment, as well as providing a paperless document system. We have our control suite that gives visibility and auditing of personnel activity, including restricting certain activity without approvals. And we have our mobility suite giving you browser and app-based connectivity to your Sage 300 for people that do not need to be logged into the back end for requisitions and approvals. Now I'm going to hand you over to Jamie so he can give you an overview and the demo. I'll be back at the end to close things off for our questions.
All right, thanks for that, Bill, and hi everyone. In this slide here, we show our different workflow solutions, and what we'll be focusing on today is our purchasing workflow, which is the one on the left-hand side of the three. And so that people are aware, we've also got two other workflow solutions for Sage 300. So we've got our payables workflow module, which provides supplier invoice workflow, which is the AP automation. And then we've got our workflow notifications module on the right-hand side. And workflow notifications provides workflows in over 20 different entities within Sage 300. So workflow notifications, or WN for short, is a very broad module, but it can provide workflows on vendor master files, customer master files, general ledger account codes, IC items, and also some key transactions, so AP payments, general ledger journal entries, AR credit notes, IC adjustments. Workflow notifications is a very broad workflow solution. And then up above the three of them is PW Web. So this is our connected service that allows the managers to do the approvals for those three workflow solutions. And then down here is the workflow documents module. And so this module lets you attach files to your transactions. And so you can attach quotes from suppliers with purchasing workflow. And for payables workflow, you can attach your invoice images from your vendors. Okay, so this next slide is showing the P2P business process. So that's procure to pay business process, which applies in really all ERPs. So you can see in the green boxes are the 6 main steps in the P2P process within any ERP system. So you've got your vendor master data, vendor master files, and your vendor catalogs. So that's set up initially. Then the users create purchase requisitions. Those requisitions go through the approval process. When they're fully approved, they create a purchase order that's sent out to the supplier. Then the goods or the services are provided. So a receipt is done to indicate that that's been received. Then the invoice is sent in by the supplier, and once that is approved, then that invoice is paid. So those are the main steps in the P2P process. And in the second row is showing the controls that our solutions provide on the P2P process. So you can see in 5 of the 6 major areas, we've got a workflow. Then in one area, which is receiving, we do not have a workflow, but we have the ability to block over receiving. So that really provides the key control there. Right, so really the key point is the end-to-end P2P business process. With Sage 300, with our solutions, the end-to-end process is tightly controlled. And just on the bottom row, again, this shows where documents can be attached. So purchase requisitions, purchase orders, PO receipts, and supplier invoices can all have files attached to the transactions. Okay, so that was just a bit of overview, but now what we'll do is focus on the purchasing workflow suite itself. So you can see in the green boxes are the Sage 300 modules. So you've got general ledger, accounts payable, purchase orders, and over on the right hand side, inventory control, and then in the middle, project and job costing. So our purchasing workflow solution is tightly integrated into Sage 300. And Bill touched on that before. So we use the Sage software development kit to develop our modules. So the look and feel is the same as Sage 300. So we've got the purchasing workflow. That's the core or central module. And so some companies run just purchasing workflow on its own. With purchasing workflow, you can set up the delegated authorities. So what are the spending limits for different levels of authority within the organization? And then you set up your workflows to meet what the client's requirements are. And so you can have multiple workflows, and each workflow can have multiple steps. And some examples, like quite often organisations, they might have one workflow for operating expenditure, another workflow for CapEx, sometimes another workflow for repairs and maintenance. And so when a transaction, and then another part of purchasing workflow is the requisition entry screen. So we've designed that to try to make it as easy as possible for the users. So the users, typically are not accounting users or accounting people. So with purchasing workflow, we've put a lot of effort into making the screen easy to use. So as a person does a requisition in purchasing workflow, that goes through an approval process, so it can be multiple approvals. And when the transaction is fully approved, then purchasing workflow will create the PO within the Sage PO module, and that's just created automatically. So yeah, that's really the purchasing workflow module. Then some of these other modules, so these are optional depending on what the client's requirements are. Workflow documents, I've touched on that a little bit already. So that's the attaching of external files to the transactions. And just one other point, so with our workflow documents module, that's actually saving those files inside the Sage database. So it's not a link to a file on the network, it's securely stored within the SQL Server. So that's workflow documents. Vendor catalog, that's for companies. Some companies want to enforce their approved vendors, and also having agreed purchase contracts, for say 12 months in advance. And so for organizations that have set up like that, then the vendor catalog meets those requirements. The internal issues module is for organizations that carry inventory but do not sell the inventory. Instead, they consume the inventory as part of their business operation. And some examples of those sort of industries is mining and also hotels. So we've got quite a number of mining companies and hotel companies around the world, and so that's where they carry the inventory. Like for mining organizations, they have a large store, but they're not selling those items. The people are doing a requisition to get the items out of the store. So that's the internal issue module. Okay, and then over on the left-hand side is funds availability. So this is the real-time GL budget checking module. So this, again, for some industries, this module is very, very important. And some of those industries or verticals, government, not-for-profits, and education are probably the three main ones. And for those types of verticals, making sure you don't exceed the budget is exceedingly important, so that's where funds availability comes in. So funds availability is reading across all of Sage and our modules. So it reads in real time, it reads GL, AP, PO, purchasing workflow, internal issues. So it's all across all of those modules. And so that's funds availability works with GL budgets, but it also works with PJC as well. And we've got quite a number of clients that run all of their, or some of them, every single transaction is through PJC. Others, the majority of transactions are through PJC, but they use funds availability to check that they're not going to exceed the budget or the estimate of PJC. Okay, so that's another, these modules are optional, like I said, so they're just dependent on whether the client has that business requirement. Okay, and then up the top is PW Web, like we've touched on before. So that's the web interface for doing the approvals. Okay, now this next infographic is just covering our AP automation solutions. And so we've did a webinar on this area about a few months ago, and so that's available on YouTube. So the AP automation is quite a big area in its own right, and we've got a very strong but cost-effective solution there. So we won't sort of go through that too much more today, but just really wanting to point that out to make people aware of that. And I guess AP automation's the 5th and 6th of the 6. So out of the 6 steps in the P2P process, AP automation is steps number 5 and 6. But today we'll be focusing on the first 4 steps. Okay, and then one more slide here is this shows our connected services. So they're basically the Sage 300 system you can see on the right-hand side here. So that can be on premises or it can be private cloud. So that's of no concern to us. So our connected services software is running on our servers in Toronto. So, and it's connecting to the Sage 300 system in real time using web services. So if someone does a requisition through the web interface, that connects to our software, which once pushes that requisition into purchasing workflow on the Sage system. And so all the heavy lifting is done on the Sage 300 system. So all the workflow routing, the budget checking, the emailing is all done within Sage 300. And so when that requisition is going into the workflow, then the workflow engine can send an email to the approver, and that email can have a hyperlink, so the approver can just click on that and it goes straight to the PW Web login page for them to do their approval. We've also got a smartphone app, and we'll show that to you shortly. So managers can do their approvals through their Apple or Android phones. So with the connected services, probably the most important point is that we do not store any financial or transactional data on our servers. So it's really like a web portal to the Sage 300 system to provide web connectivity to the users. And so the users are interacting with Sage 300, but they're not inside Sage 300. So a lot of customers, CFOs, that quite often they say to us, that's one thing that they love the most about our PW Web solution. So here's our PW Web login page. So we put in our user ID, our password, and we select our company from our drop-down. So one key point is that this banner on this page, it's currently showing Pacifictech PW Web. For clients that sign up for PW Web, they can put their own banner at the top, so it has their logo and look and feel. Right, so we put in our username, our password, and we click login. So what PW Web is doing at this stage, it's connecting to Sage 300 and checking that that password is correct for that user. And so if the password is correct, then the next thing that it does is it reads the user's security rights from Sage 300. So if we just look at the menus here, you can see we've got our approval menus. So that's for approving transactions. To create new transactions, you can see new requisition, PO receipt, punch out, PO change order, and creating an invoice. And then we've got our inquiry screens. So we've got 6 inquiry screens, substitutions, etc. So what the user sees in these menus is driven by their security within Sage 300. So really, we're just trying to emphasize the key point, all the configuration, or almost all of the configuration is in Sage 300, and this is really just like a web portal. Okay, so we'll come and do a new requisition. So what we have our fields at the top here. First of all, we need to choose the workflow that this requisition will go through. What workflows are displayed here are based on what you give to each user. So for each user, you say which workflows they're allowed to have access to and which cost centers they're allowed to have access to. So you can limit those by user. Now you can see the job related flag. So if I tick that, you can see all the PJC fields show up. so PWWeb, so purchasing workflow is integrated with PJC, and so is PWWeb. So I won't do a job related one for our demo. So what we'll do now, we'll choose a template of conference. And so you can, by choosing a template, what it does is it populates all of the lines, so that, again, it's just trying to make it easy for the users to save them time. If they normally order so many items at the same time, you can set up a template. And you can see each line has got different vendors on it as well. So that's another feature of our requisition. Each line can be for a different vendor. Right, so and then back to our header, we've got our description, we've got a reference, and then we've got a comment field. So now if we come down to the lines, we can see our airfares from this supplier. And you can see it's got the general ledger code here as well. So that's another part of purchasing workflow. It can build the general ledger codes for the users, and the majority of our customers utilize that. Because the requisitioners often are not very familiar with general ledger codes, so they get purchasing workflow to build the general ledger codes for them. So if I open up this line, we can see our airfares here. So we'll say 2 airfares at $400. And then we can have our accommodation. So let's say 3 nights accommodation. And I've got the third line here, which is incidentals. So I'll just click delete to delete that line. Quite often people say to us, are you able to delete a line because it's come from a template? And the answer is yes, you can. So the fact that a template's been used, that doesn't limit what can be done in any way. So you can edit lines, you can delete lines, you can add new lines. So what we'll do, we'll add a new line now just to go through the key fields to show that to you. So if I just start typing in some letters like MIS, you can see it narrows down the list automatically as we type each character. So it's, for non-accounting people, for operational users, it's very easy to use. So we put miscellaneous. Now we can overwrite the description as well. And so a lot of these fields you can enable whether users can do these things or not. Right, and now I can go on my vendor finder. So this shows us all of the vendors from AP. And so Chloride Systems, $100 of taxis. Okay, so those are our 3 lines. Now we'll come and attach a quote from a supplier. So this is the Workflow Documents module. So we click on this tab here and we select the file to attach. So now we can pick up a PDF. And we can attach multiple files. There's no limit to the number of files that can be attached, but you can limit the size of each individual file so that someone doesn't upload a really huge file like a video. Okay, so I've attached my 2 quotes. So now I'm happy that this requisition is completed. So I now click submit to put it into the workflow. We could have clicked add. So add would have saved it in Purchasing Workflow but left it there so that we could come back and edit it. But by submit, it's now sending it into the workflow engine. And so what Purchasing Workflow is doing here, it has put this transaction into Purchasing Workflow in the Sage database, and it is put it into the workflow. So it's determined who it needs to go to be approved, and it has sent that person an email. So there's a lot of configuration options around the emailing. Basically, the key point is at each step you can have emailing going to multiple different parties. Right, so that's requisition number 702. So what we'll do now, we'll just come and look in the inquiry screen just to show you this. So we come into My Requisitions. And we can see here that, so what I've got it defaulting to showing unapproved requisitions. We could change the status to different statuses. So we can always come and look at all our old requisitions if we want to. But here we can see number 702. So if we open that up, the key, what I was wanting to show you here is that we can see who it's gone to. So this next action, it tells us that this requisition's been routed to the division manager for them to do the approval. Right, so a requisitioner can always see where their requisition is sitting, which person is sitting with. Okay, so that person will log out, and now an email would have gone to the division manager. So the division manager would have got an email. That email would have had a hyperlink, which is this hyperlink up here, this URL. And so they just need to put in their password and click login. Okay, right, so because they're a manager, they will be doing, most of the time they'll be doing approvals rather than transactions. And I've got it set up to default to my invoices. So because you can see here, well, these 3 menu options equate to the 3 workflow modules. So if the client's got one of the workflow modules, they'll only see 1 entry here. If they've got 2 or 3 of the workflow modules, they'll see them all showing up there. So it's a single login and a single interface to do all of their approvals. So as I've got a default to supplier invoices, I'll just change it back to purchasing. And so now we can see the 2 requisitions that are sitting with this manager to be approved. Excuse me. Okay, so the first thing the manager can, let's just slow down. So it just shows them the header information here. So the date, the description, who it's come from, and the cost center and the dollar value. So that's the header information. So now the manager will want to know more about that. So they can come and look at the details here. So airfare accommodation miscellaneous. They can see who the suppliers are. They can see the general ledger codes and the quantities and the unit costs. They can also come over to workflow documents and they can look at the quotes from the suppliers. And so these open up within the browser. So that's nice and easy for them to see. And so if they're happy with all of that, then the next thing they might want to do is look at how is their budget position at the moment. So that's the funds availability module. So you can see this dollar icon here. So this only shows up if the client has the funds availability module. So if we click on the dollar icon, what that is doing, PWWeb sending a request back to funds availability on the Sage server saying, crunch the numbers for this requisition. And you can see it's presenting the information there. So we've got there's two GL codes on that requisition, miscellaneous and marketing. So you can see budget, actual, committed, and available. So the budget is there, the actuals are straight out of the GL. Oh, what I should say as well, the budget is straight out of the GL as well. We obviously haven't set up any budgets. And here are the commitments. So these are the open purchase orders within the system, within Sage PO. So you can see straight away that obviously because there's no budget, they're in the red. But this is all calculating real time. So, you know, if someone goes and does another transaction at this instant, and then I run this again, then these numbers will change. What it's also showing here is this document, so you can see the value of this requisition here, and it also shows you other unapproved. So you can see what is the value of other requisitions that are coming through the purchasing workflow system at this point in time. So what funds availability is trying to do is really present, you know, as much information to the manager that can help them to make their decisions and keep within their budgets. And just while we're on that subject, we've got, if we look under funds, under inquiries, we've got our two funds availability inquiries. So this funds availability here, this is looking at funds availability for a single requisition. But what we also provide is funds availability at a cost center level. So if a manager is wondering how the cost center is looking from a expenditure point of view, they can come in here, and this is now showing them all of the GL codes in their cost center. So you can see their cost center's got 500. So again, showing budget, actual, commitment, available, and then and the total. So they can see for their cost center as a whole, what is the status, and then they can also drill down from here. So this shows it to them in a bit more detail. So this shows each stage within the Sage business process. And then they can drill down to actually look at the detailed transactions as well. Yeah, so that's funds availability inquiry at a cost center level. So again, what we're trying to do here is give the information to the people through a web interface, you know, so they don't need to keep calling up finance to ask them for information. They can just use self-service to look up the information. And we've also got funds availability at a PJC level. So the whole idea is funds availability, you can look at it from a GL perspective, or you can look at it from a PJC perspective. So here are the two PJC contracts underneath this cost center. We can open that up to, if we want to drill into, we can see Toronto's, we're blowing our budget by $18,000. So we can then click into that to see the projects below that contract. So we can see they're both over by about $9,000. So we can expand that out to look at the categories below the projects. So yeah, so with our funds availability related to PJC, it works at all three levels of PJC. Okay, so anyway, that was just a little bit of a side topic. So if we come back to our purchasing approval console, we've got our two transactions there. So what we could do is we can approve it, and it's sort of exceedingly easy. You just approve or you can decline. And if you approve or decline, in both cases, you can put in a 60-character comment, and this comment is stored within the database, but can also be emailed to an appropriate party. And so the way that normally works is, especially if you decline a transaction, let's say if I decline this one, and I say this is not required, and I click postmark documents. So that's now declining that transaction and sending an email to the requisitioner to say your requisition has been declined and the reason for the decline is ABC that I just put in. So that whole declining process works very smoothly. In terms of our number 702, I'll just leave it there because the other thing that I want to show you at this stage is the smartphone app. And so the smartphone app is called PT Go. So this is it here. So I'm obviously using a browser, but this is exactly what the app looks like on a phone. So you download it from the Apple Store or the Google Store. And so when I log in, it shows us how many purchasing transactions we've got sitting with us and how many supplier invoices. So I've got one requisition, so I can click on the arrow to drill into that. There it is there. So it's a requisition 702, conference in Toronto, $1,700. It's got two attachments. I can drill into that to see the details. So there's the airfares, the accommodation, the taxis. I can open up the attachments. So they just download onto the phone just like they do in any other app and open up within the phone app. And I can approve or decline. I can also add more files from my phone if I want to, but I can approve it. And again, I've got my 60-character comment. Right, so it now goes green, so that's now sending the message back to Purchasing Workflow on the Sage system saying this transaction's been approved, move it along to the next step in the workflow. If we come back here, I've now finished all my purchasing transactions, so that menu's not shown anymore. Okay, so that's all. So we've done a requisition through the web. We then did the approval. We looked at doing the approval through PW Web. We then swapped over to the smartphone app and did the approval there. So all of this has been updating into the Sage database, but we obviously haven't got into Sage yet. So let's go and look at Sage in the back end. Excuse me. Right, so here's Purchasing Workflow sitting in the Sage desktop. So you can see we follow all the same concepts as Sage do for laying out the folders and things. We can see our transactions down here. In statistics and inquiries, there's a very important inquiry screen here called Management Inquiry. And this shows you can look at all the requisitions that have been through the system. We've got a status called in process. So if we just click go, this shows us all the requisitions that are currently going through the workflow. You can see our one here, number 702. So we can see it sitting with the controller. So we've had one approval as the division manager. Now we've got a second approval, which is by the controller. And so the controller I'm logged in as a controller, and the controller will normally be in Sage all day, every day, or in this example anyway. So they can come and do their approval within the desktop. So they can do it in the desktop. They could do it through the web as well if they wanted to. They can mix and match. So there's no limitations on which interface is. Well, you can limit it if you want to, but that's more a business decision. So here's number 702, so we can double click to look at the requisition. So the functionality between the desktop and the web's basically identical. They can see the airfares, accommodation, taxis. They can look at the documents and open them up. And they can, if we close that, they can also do the funds availability. So this is doing the same thing as we did from the web. So now we're doing it from the desktop. So there it is, showing that information again. And they can drill down. Right, so if we're happy with that, we'll click post. So now you'll just see a little window popping up here, which is the Sage PO window. So what Purchasing Workflow is doing, this is the second approval and the final approval for this transaction. So Purchasing Workflow is now creating the purchase orders. So on the requisition, there was 3 lines and they're all to separate vendors. So Purchasing Workflow is therefore creating 3 purchase orders, and it is also emailing those purchase orders. And the way I've got it set, or the way most clients have it set up, is to email the purchase order to the requisitioner. The requisitioner then check it, and then they forward it on to the vendor. Our system also does allow emailing straight to vendors, and some clients do use that, but most clients have someone check it before it goes out to the supplier. All right, so that's okay. So now that one's gone off the list. So let's come back and look at our inquiries, and I'll now change it to, whoops, all. And if I come down to 702, you can see it's completed. So this requisition, it's finished its life cycle. The purchase orders have been created. So if I double click and open that up, and what I'll do is come to the events tab. So we haven't looked at this yet, but this is what the Purchasing Workflow is doing, is keeping a record of everything that happens on that requisition in this event tab. So you can see it was submitted by this user on this date and this time. Then it was approved, you can see it's approved by this user on this date, this time. That was a comment they put in. So that was a comment I put on the smartphone app. Then it was approved by the controller on this date and this time. So this is like the audit trail of who approved this requisition. And the other thing, if we come to the requisition, the front grid, if we come along a little bit, you can see a column here called purchase order number. So as Purchasing Workflow was creating the purchase orders, it was also populating this column here so that you can see from the requisition what purchase orders were created from that requisition. So 747 through to 749. Okay, so let's just go over to the Sage module to just see them in there, just to make sure they're in there, which, so here we go, so PO 747. There's the airfares to this vendor, Century Supplies, 2 airfares, $400. Here's purchase order number 748 for the accommodation, and then purchase order 749 for the taxis. Okay, so those purchase orders are sitting in the Sage PO module. All right, so the next step in the process is the 4th step, which is the receiving. And so receiving can be done through the web as well. And again, that's quite a common approach that a lot of clients use. So the requisitions are done in the web, the approvals are done in the web or through a smartphone, and then the receiving is done in the web. So what we do is we come into our PO receipts, and now what it's showing us here is all of the open purchase orders that are in cost centers that this user has got access to. So there's some, I guess, 2 really key points there. It only shows open purchase orders because you don't want to see closed purchase orders because they're not applicable, but it only shows the ones that are in this cost centers that this user has got access to. So if you've got some users in the Los Angeles office and other users in the New York office, you can segregate. So the ones in New York can't do a receipt against a PO that belongs in Los Angeles. All right, so here they are. We've got it sorted by reverse date order, so the most recent one's at the top. So here's number 747. So this is the airfares, so I'll click on that and it shows me the airfares there. I can now put in the date and I can now do a receive all. So I don't know if you noticed, but the quantity received was 0. By clicking on receive all, it's just changed that to 2, and we can click post. This is now creating a PO receipt transaction within the Sage PO module. And so now it'll refresh this list. So because that PO has been fully received, it is now closed, so it doesn't meet the criteria to be displayed here. So now we'll click on number PO748, which is our accommodation. And what we'll do is a partial receipt here. So we'll receive 2. And we'll say it's completed, and we'll say we came back early. So in other words, the purchase order was for 3, but we're going to do a receipt for 2. And by saying it's completed, it's going to cancel that remaining 1. So you can do a partial receipt and cancel the remainder, or you can do a partial receipt and leave the remainder on back order. All right, and click post. So that's now doing that receipt there. All right, so that's the receiving side of it. So that's really, I think we've covered now sort of, I guess, the life cycle up until the invoice arrives. When the invoice arrives, that's now into AP automation. So that's another sort of whole topic which we've done a previous webinar on. So just, I mean, I guess there's a lot of other areas we could go into, but just one key one I wanted to touch on is substitutions. So a substitution, that is if a user is going away on leave for say 1 week, they can come in here and they can add in a substitution entry. So they can say, I'm going on leave from next Monday to next Friday. While I'm away, this other user will take care of doing my approvals. All right, so really that's the life cycle of doing a purchase requisition, going through an approval, creating a purchase order, and then doing a receipt. So Bill, over to you from here.
All right, thanks, Jamie. So let's take a quick look at our Pacifictech solution and how it's different than some of the other solutions. All of our data resides inside of Sage 300, so there's no issues with syncing of data between 2 separate systems. Configuration all inside of Sage 300. So it's easy for our business partners and our end users to learn and work with. It's plug and play and lower cost of ownership. Here's a quick look at some of our other modules that we have available. And we've got our funds availability, so you can review your budgets before approving spending on any requisitions. You saw some of that today. Workflow notifications is a workflow around other things that you'd like to have control of, such as vendor bank accounts, prevent banking fraud and customer credit limits, preventing anyone from changing these without approval. Internal issues helps manage requisitions for items you have purchased already and have stored at various locations in your organization. Audit logger, which is referred to sometimes as Big Brother, helps keep track of who made changes to fields and transactions or modifications to the GL. Some of the other ones you've seen today, purchasing workflow and payables workflow is another one that lines up with it to get the whole procure to pay solution. You can manage that whole cycle and keep tight controls, which you saw some of that today through the purchasing workflow. PW Web you saw today, which gives you browser access for requisitions, review, and approvals, plus our Pacifictech Go app for your mobile phone. And this also works with our payables workflow and our workflow notifications. Vendor catalog, so you can control any supply agreements you may have with vendors for pricing, agreement periods, and more. And our workflow documents enables you to attach quotes and on the payable side, invoices and other documents throughout your whole procure to pay cycle. We're really focused on keeping you connected and on the move at all times. And you can see this even more so with our connected services and our web requisitions.
To thank everybody for their time. Really appreciate you spending the few moments with us to go through this solution, and please feel free to contact us if you have any further questions.